Maria Finoshina there in Libya. Al-Qaeda says it has a new leader and the US has a new bogeyman. Ayman al-Zawahiri was Osama bin Laden's deputy and he's now heading the terrorist organisation. He's already promising to continue the jihad against America and Israel. Well, Phil Rees is an expert on terrorism and joins me now live in London. Phil, good to see you there on RT. Bin Laden's dead and now there's a new villain on the block. What do we know about this man and just how scared should we be?
Well, he may be new to many people, many of your audience, but he's actually rather old, and he was there from the very beginning. And in fact, he was very instrumental in leading bin Laden in 1989. And let's just cast ourselves back briefly, Bill. There was all the Mujahideen who defeated the Soviet Union in Afghanistan then. They defeated a superpower. They didn't quite know what to do next. And it was Ayman Zawahiri who was instrumental in leading Osama bin Laden and that faction into the kind of global jihad that we know now, the targets groups like the United Nations, like aid agencies. So really, he has been on what you might call the extremist side of the movement.
Now, of course, Al-Qaeda is a loosely connected cell-based structure, isn't it? And what difference does it really make who's in charge? Just how much power will this man have?
Well, you've got to remember that the jihadists, basically, they have a phrase that they give a loyalty to Allah and they give an enmity for the sake of Allah. So that's the key bayat, the key loyalty that they declare. So it's not actually to any leader, to any person. So I don't think it'll make a big difference. And remember, Ayman Zawahiri was the main theoretician. Osama bin Laden thought in broad strokes. It was Ayman Zawahiri who was involved in the nitty-gritty, and some people even said he was the brains behind the movement. So in that sense, there'll be a continuum.
The US is quite keen to say there's a sign of division within Al-Qaeda because it's actually taken over 6 weeks to appoint a leader. Does that say anything to you, that there is division?
I don't really believe that. I don't know for sure. Certainly there have been, groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, some of these Americans who speak good English who've raised in prominence. But in my view, there was only one man who would replace Osama bin Laden, and I think there was consensus there. I do believe, actually, Al-Qaeda is remarkably an organization that does appeal in Islamic concept of shura to a kind of consensus. And I think that dialogue did take place before he formally announced it, rather than him being seen to unilaterally demand power himself.
Do you think, though, the West, America, should be worried about a threat in some ways where the group, Al-Qaeda, wants to reassert itself now? It has a new leader. Some suggest there could be a massive attack imminent.
Well, you might say that anybody who's new in the job might want to do something spectacular to impose their name. To some extent, that's true, but also Al-Qaeda, as you mentioned, is basically cell structures around the world. Osama bin Laden was not directing these in any sort of immediate sense, in any operational sense, and Ayman al-Zawahiri will not be doing that either. He has been the theoretician behind it. I think he's still as committed as ever to the principles of a global jihad, and that will carry on. So I think the threat to the West, indeed to Russia in its different manifestations, is still there.
The recent military campaigns in Yemen, CIA, even British troops are said to be there because of the Al-Qaeda influence, taking advantage of a potential power vacuum there. What do you make of that development?
Well, I think that that's got to be taken with a pinch of salt. I think the West was wrong-footed by what was going on in the Middle East, and I think they're very keen to have a foothold there. Now, certainly Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is one of the most active ideological groups there, but the Yemeni president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was injured recently, he used Al-Qaeda as an excuse to get funds from the United States, and then he used those funds against another group in a local dispute. And in the same way that I think that the United States can attack drone attacks on certain areas and claim that's fine, we're going for Al-Qaeda, so our influence there shouldn't be questioned. So I think we should be slightly cynical about those claims.
Just briefly, I understand you've actually spoken to al-Zawahiri in the past. Why did you speak to him, and what did you make of him during that communication? Tell us just briefly.
This was in 1998, before the declaration of war against Crusaders and Jews that effectively launched Al-Qaeda in its modern manifestation. I was actually driving at the time, and indeed I was with someone who was linked to him, and I was invited to go to this meeting. There was a war in Kosovo at the time, but he was basically a gentleman. He spoke good English. He was very reserved. He said, we will welcome you here. We will take care of your security if you want to come. If you can't make it now, come later. He's a very erudite man. He certainly wasn't an angry man. He sounded really quite civilized. What happened was after that, there were bombings in East Africa in the American embassies, and basically access was stopped. So unfortunately, I really regret, to be honest with you, not having gone to that meeting to meet these guys. Obviously, as a journalist, it would have been very beneficial. But, in my brief conversation with him on the phone, yes, he's actually a well-informed and intelligent man, and a doctor, well-trained, and he speaks 3 languages.
Phil Rees, I wish we could talk more on this. We're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us live in London.